Hey there, Rising Star PF2E here again. So a couple weeks back, I made a video called The River of Souls for Dummies. And in that video, I explained part of the cosmology of the River of Souls using the first edition and second edition image diagrams. But after doing that video, I realized that there isn't really a single good visual chart for the whole process. It's well and good to explain, what these two images mean in the edition, but the whole topic, there's no visual representation of that or an easy means to learn it other than just going through all these books, all these different Wikipedia pages, and sort of mapping it in your mind. So this is my amateur attempt at making something visual that we can go through together. I've spent the last couple of weeks making this because I want to really show you and help you understand some of the last 20 years of Lost Omens / Golarion, the planet's lore, in the newer context of 2E, because it's a topic that seems to confuse everyone. I've cut this whole chart up before we get into it, and you can download it down below in the Dropbox. There's a link down in the description. There'll probably be one in the comments. And there's a version of this that also doesn't have all of these icons on it. Okay, so the unremarkable reincarnator, the simplest one. It's very simple. It's a very simple loop to get us started here. So we always start here. The mortal lives. We start here. What is it to live? It's basically just a soul gathering XP for Pharasma. Really, and that's how you can sort of view it. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, we live. We die, which is the soul leaves the vessel. We end up at the River of Souls, or going down the River of Souls, the pathway to the Boneyard, or soul sort of going along this path naturally. There's things that can get us along the way, such as Astrodemon, Sahkil, Nimbaloth, and stuff that destroys, consumes, and twists your soul. And it can also happen here, as you can see, in the living stage with these other things, like Qlippoths or other stuff. We're not talking about these two endpoints, though. We're continuing on. So let's say we avoid those two big no-nos, okay? Those big bad bats. And we end up down here to the Boneyard, the Spirelands, Purgatory. You can wander here for a very long time, potentially, before doing any next step. It's a place of infinite vastness on the edges of the sigil. And when we're here, though, if we know ourselves really well, like I said when we began this little path here, there's this thing called the Lake of Mortal Reflections. And it's sort of like this layer, sort of this lake sort of across the whole plane, if you would. And if you know yourself really well, or you can find it, it is also described as a thing that you can find. You can decide just to reincarnate, which is to sort of forget all of your being, all of that, but your soul goes right back into another body to live another life. And that can be for anyone who's not punished, any mortal, including Fae and etc., not punished along this process, and those who are willing. And people from Tian-Xia are probably a higher percent chance of doing this because their faiths and philosophies have sort of adopted this reincarnation as part of a way of viewing life. So, the whole process is very simple. Lives, dies, River of Soul, Boneyard, reincarnation, lives. You end up right at the start. Now let's do a full rotation. Let's go through the whole process of being a mortal, living, dying, going to the Boneyard, going to court, becoming a shade, turning into an outsider, going to the Antipode, becoming new souls, potentially becoming a fae, and then all the way back again. That sort of rhymed, didn't it? So Timmy the angel, Timmy the human on Golarion dies, okay? He lived a pure life of lawful good. He believed in upholding the law. He didn't believe in any particular deity, although he believed in many different pantheons that included a lot of gods from heaven. So he dies. He goes down the River of Souls. He goes to the Boneyard. Because he knows himself really well, and he's not being punished in his next judgment, in his next life as well, it seems, by Pharasma. He has the option of reincarnating, but he doesn't want to do that. He wants to go to this other plane, hopefully, or something greater than that. So he ends up going through the Graveyard of Souls, and this is the thing that separates the court from the rest of the Spireland / Boneyard. And there are some shades that are interred here by Pharasma called the dead that don't ever leave, or they turn into psychopomps. Usually you need to be guided through here because it's sort of a monument to the dead. So you'd be guided through here by one of the various kinds of psychopomp. And then you go to court. One of two things happens when you go to court. Either it's non-contentious, meaning your soul is sort of already prejudged, or there isn't really a need for a hearing. You might have a ceremonial hearing or acknowledgement maybe by Amaraj or some other form of psychopomp, Or maybe not. You might just be guided right to your respective court's portal, or Divine Plains portal, or whatever. Or there's a court hearing. Maybe you did one or two things in your life, and a fiend has caught on to that, knows of you coming through the court maybe preemptively, and it's like, wait. And in these situations of contention, you might have a devil, like a fiend, and an angel. There might be an Axiomite, any of the other kinds of shades. There could even be like something like just an elect that was recently like a friend of yours that died to, say some words on your part to maybe get things to go the way they know that you want it to go, for instance. And usually at court, it's not Pharasma actually who's the one throwing down the gavel. It's usually Yamaraj. And that's these things. They are essentially the law lords of Pharasma and the Boneyard, and they resemble something between a black dragon and a crow. Some people say a chicken, but those people are silly. Let's say that Timmy did one thing at some point. He stole a piece of candy when he was a kid, and the fiend brings up this point in court. There is a court hearing, and there's an angel there sort of representing the rest of his life, and this one thing he did, this fiend is doing some legalese maybe, really trying to make a case for it. Let's say it's thrown right out. No. Little Timmy is going to heaven, I think, is what the Yamaraj says as the gavel goes flying down. So, judgment. Most souls pass to a plane related to the principles to become petitioners, also known as shades. Dissident souls that refuse judgment are interred to a dormant existence in the graveyard of souls, as the dead, as I already said. Or roam in distress. Wander the astral plane as untethered, a different kind of shade, or return to the universe as a reincarnated being. Sometimes Pharasma can even just send you back up to that reincarnated part. There's also those who are specially selected under special contracts, sort of brought back to existence under a contract. You might not even know the terms of, because that's how fate sort of works and Pharasma sort of works. And that's a background known as coming back as a returned. Failed souls, though, that never exhibited faith in anything or passion in anything in life are also either interred just to sort of melt away, or are sentenced to Spire's Edge as a different kind of shade known as Asphodus or Aphodus. I'm not sure how you say that necessarily. A city where Spire's Edge, where those who live meaningless lives can get a second chance. Anyways, though, Timmy, though, is none of these. He's going right through. So he goes to the court. What is the court? There's sort of a main court, and then there's 8 courts that sort of surround that court, and then a whole bunch of smaller portals to all these different planes and every other god's divine realm. So a portal to every major plane and numerous smaller ones to every divine realm surround Pharasma's court. The courts are bustling with psychopomps and agents outsiders of the gods and planes. This is the fiends, the angels. Cleansed of Nirvana might even be here. A dead relative could be recently an elect and brought to court to make a hearing. All of these different things. They come and go here. It's a place sort of neutrality in that case. And the only plane that doesn't have representation in people vying for souls in the courts, really, for their planes, is the barren devouring court of Abaddon, which few willingly visit. It's mostly nihilists who are sent there only by Pharasma. Only the souls claimed by Urgathoa, Xiphus, or the Apocalypse Riders are escorted to the Devouring Court's portal for Abaddon. Everyone else must go alone. And in fact, it is so unorthodox of a thing that even Pharasma dislikes it, to the point where she has allowed there to be a demon and a devil stationed at the Devouring Court to actually persuade souls sent there to choose one of the other options. Has nothing to do with Timmy, though. It's an interesting point to make, though. So he was being sent to heaven. He's going to become an elect. You can come all the way down here to Who's That Shade Petitioner to read about them. So an elect is, they have halos, they have wings. They're viewed as too vulnerable to leave heaven once they get there, or to interact with other outsiders. They can turn into full-blown angels or archons. And that's sort of what this is here, archons, angels. So Timmy turns into a shade. He goes to heaven, he turns into an elect. Shades, petitioner, what is that? So, shade is the term for basically the infant and early stages of what later turns into outsiders or is fed upon to become or consumed into becoming these bigger outsiders. And shade is the term from remaster onward, and petitioner is the word for that same term pre-remaster before. So 1E used petitioner, and after remaster in 2E, we use the term shade now. And all shades and petitioners are also outsiders, but the term outsider is usually reserved for things that are made out of multiple beings worth of quintessence / spiritual essence. Little confusing. They are outsiders, but they're not quite full outsiders. So you can think of, again, shades as the infant and early stage of outsiders. And they're made out of a body made out of quintessence. And quintessence is the physical form of spiritual essence. And it's fused with a judged soul. That's where the soul sort of comes in. So the soul sort of gets wiped its memory and stuff and gets turned into, well, transferred into the body, this new form presented by the plane or the god or where you're sent, essentially. Most common folks spent eons as a weak petitioner / shade. In our case, Timmy is an elect. He's going to be probably an elect for quite a while, proving himself in heaven before he's allowed to be turned into an angel. And now Timmy could befall one of two fates. He could continue along that righteous path and turn into a full-blown angel or an archon, or he could die as a petitioner off plane on one of his duties trying to become one of those things. If he dies as a petitioner off plane, most outsiders, all of them, upon their destruction, their quintessence and spiritual essence and its combined knowledge and belief is absorbed normally into the home plane. But if you die off plane, it will go Ari and go into other planes, get tossed all around like all of the universe, and it creates all kinds of others. Timmy, let's say, turns into an angel. He lives his life at some point in the aeons to come. He dies off plane. So what happens to like your energy and stuff that's gone Ari and stuff? And what do you mean by that? Well, a lot of it gets sucked up to the Antipode that slowly draws all the unabsorbed or decaying essence in the universe. It brings it sort of back towards itself. And when it does that, and it's sat there for long enough, it actually gets shot around the universe again. Well, not really the universe, but sort of the planes, if you would, back to the vitality plane to split into new mortal souls, which was the whole point of living to begin with, it seems like. To gather all of this sort of experience, if you would, to do all of these things, to spread that out to all of the planes in the universe, and then for it to inevitably drain back sort of where it all begins, which is Creation's Forge, which is why in 2E they renamed the Vitality Plane to that to closer link that. Anyways, though, Timmy dies at some point as his angel form and all of that. It gets drained at some point here, ends up at Creation's Forge. And now it splits into multiple new souls. And after that happens, it goes from Creation's Forge through the first world, and we'll get to this in a second, through this conduit. And by going through here, this is what creates Fae. And the first world was sort of the universe before this as a building block, if you would, to what we have today. It still exists, though, very parallel to our normal world, or the material plane. These souls going through this to make it, though, to our normal universe, by going through this adjacent plane, is what is creating the Fae. But it goes through, and then it goes to new mortal bodies, and we end up at the start again. So without explanation, Timmy lived. Timmy died. He went down the river of souls. He avoided the bad stuff. He made it to the Boneyard. He said no to reincarnation. He went through the graveyard of souls, guided. There was a court hearing. They threw the fiends thing right out the window. He wasn't any of this. None of this applied to him. He went right to here. He became an elect, the Brown. What is an elect? They have wings, halos. They're viewed as vulnerable. They don't usually interact with other beings as much is most of what the lore tells us, and they turn into angels and archons. So he's a shade. Well, he's an elect only. He's still an outsider, but he's not an angel, which is what this is saying. Timmy then went on to become an angel. He then may be on the material plane, acting as a messenger of some sort to mortal heralds of all forms or whatever, some reason. He died off plane on the material plane. His essence gets sucked sort of goes all the way across the universe, all over in all different places, sort of breaks apart and does all kinds of different things. At some point, it gets drained back to the Antipode, which creates into something usable for Creation's Forge. It makes new mortal souls. Some of those souls probably turn into Fae. So Timmy just turned into multiple different things right here, essentially. And then through this, more normal mortals, whatever that means, all kinds of mortals, including many creature mortals, like not just humanoids, many different creatures also are mortals with souls. They end up back here. Boom. Okay, so our next one is Bobby No Judgment. Okay, so Bobby No Judgment lived most of his life in Geb, the nation of Geb. It's a nation of mostly undeath, although there are a bunch of living people also there. And he's gone through most of his life listening to many of the clergy of Urgathoa and all kinds of other deities all about undeath. And Urgathoa's origin is as a mortal. When she died, she believed so much that when she died that she'd go to a place of infinite pleasure, that when she was met with Pharasma and judgment, she spat in her face and said, nope, and went on to become the first undead. And when she did, she became a god, and she brought with her the first diseases. Oh, fun. Because even disease brings with it immortal pleasure. Some mortals, like Bobby No Judgment, choose undeath similarly to reject judgment, or to extend this existence, this hunger for more, or the gluttony, or whatever you want in that, the desire for want of any kind, and pleasure in anything, including the intensely unenjoyable. And there's 4 main categories of undead. There's consummates. They usually have souls. There's stuff like vampires, liches, and mummies. Usually a conversion of someone. This can be willing and unwilling with consummates. There's the hungry, which is usually not willing. It can also be willing, though. This is stuff like morgs and ghouls, and they convert usually through magic disease, like ghoul fever, for instance. There's also the incorporeal undead, which most of them have souls. There's also versions that don't have souls and some others. This is stuff like ghosts, specters, and banshees. There's also the mindless undead. And despite being called mindless, that doesn't mean soulless necessarily. There are skeletons that have souls as well as skeletons that don't have souls. There's zombies that have souls and zombies that don't have souls. Sort of the difference between the PC options presented and some of the NPC options presented. And for instance, there's ways of viewing the mindless undead, like thralls from necromancers, for instance, to not actually even be a corpse, but to just be the void plane's planar essence, sort of comprising a form. It's a way of doing neutral necromancy, if you would. I have some very cool stuff here in the block to sort of explain some of the interesting stuff you can do with the information of this, and why sometimes a soulless thing is still hit by spirit damage. For our case, though, Timmy is going to die. So he went on, he became a vampire, he lived his life for maybe a couple 100 years, he got staked, he died. What does that do? It just puts him back on the track. So the soul leaves the vessel is what that sort of means when you die as undead. So your soul was sort of trapped within this vampire form, and now it's released. So you could kill a vampire, the body destroyed, release the mortal spirit to this point right here, okay? And then it comes down here, goes to the Boneyard. It can await resurrection if Pharasma wills it, going to this point right here. It's only possible until you're judged. Time still passes, but it's diminished. So this is pretty easy to do in a lot of story contexts. And this is actually something, just so you know, this whole line is something suggested by actually official Paizo products in of themselves as an option to do. Anyways, you kill the vampire. He ends up down here, the soul. You could then cast Resurrection at 7th rank up to revive them back as a non-vampire in a new body. Yeah, so there's some mechanical stuff for you why lore is interesting, because you could do that, and there's so much you could do with the story knowing that. But anyways, Bobby No Judgment ends up here. Mortal dies. He goes to River of Souls. He goes to the Boneyard. Let's say that he doesn't go here. Or how about this? Let's say he does go here, but so much time passes that he's forced to continue on. He's actually waiting so long either in the Boneyard or Spire's Edge that his soul is actually damaged. He has to go to a soul repository. A soul repository is basically like a hospital slash a processing facility that's ran by psychopomps, and it's basically if a soul is damaged, it can't really be judged properly. So they fix it up so you can go to judgment or go back to wandering the Boneyard and potentially reincarnate or something else. Anyways, brought to the soul repository. He doesn't even want to go to judgment. He's forcibly brought by a psychopomp. It's your time. He is brought in. There's all kinds of contention. There's all kinds of agents talking about all kinds of different things. He is judged, however, because he is refusing judgment. He's specifically like Pharasma, I refuse this. He is interred as a dead to dissolve with time. So he just goes whoop. And that was Bobby No Judgment. But that's not the only way to undeath. You see, when you die, you could potentially be knocked from the river. This is something that's mentioned in all kinds of passing, and it's sort of surprising me they never really explain the term. So let me explain the term of being knocked from the river for you. Being knocked from the river. When death is significant, mental essence can build. A soul can be knocked, being too charged, that soul, and its spiritual essence goes awry, sort of all across the universe, that sort of idea, because it's being shaped by mental essence. And it takes its own path, or it gets stuck. Many evil outsiders' goal, when they come to the material plane, is to consume souls, knock souls, and it's why many, like the Asuras, that are divine accidents, get such joy from it. And it connects all kinds of different blocks in the chart that don't have lines to themselves. Like, this could technically make you go in all kinds of different ways from this point right here. You could view this as almost connecting to nearly every other part because you sort of take your own path when you're knocked from the river. Basically, when you're not going down this track. Anyways, though, so when you're knocked from the river, okay, it can also be, so being knocked from the river can end up at undeath. Being really attached to life also at this stage can be another means, though, to go directly into undeath as an incorporeal or otherwise. But, and that obviously goes all the way through this, undeath, all the same thing we did before, or, you know, being judged, going through the top, coming back. But this is where other stuff starts happening. So if you have a terrible death and you're knocked from the river, you can turn into all kinds of other outsiders. It can also just sort of happen along the river because of this, or any other thing here. That's why it all sort of goes weird here on the right. Anyways, this is where you can turn into an Eidolon. This is the thing that summoners summon, or phantoms, which is a summoner option that was related to the 1E spiritualist class. This is where this all starts coming in, is things that are knocked from the river turning into these sort of other kinds of beings. Anyways, let's say that it turns into an other. These are still outsiders, these other things, a lot of them. And because of that, when they die, it's the same thing here. However, when an outsider dies and it goes Ari, it can come back and become one of these others. Another thing is, when it dies, it can go here directly to Antipode, becoming an outsider, because the essence just goes Ari, right? It can just end up going sort of like this. The next one is for the Fae. Let's call him Whimsical Joe. Whimsical Joe believed in a couple different Eldists, and the Eldists are the individuals who rule the first world, essentially. And if you come up here, you'll see mortal worshippers of the Eldists, who were rulers of the first world, that are judged by Pharasma, reincarnate as a type of Fae whose behavior aligns with the soul's mortal personality. This is the route that we're going to take right here. They also were created, like I said before, through souls just going through here from creations forwards, all those new souls. Sometimes they are just given form by the first world to become a Fae. But Joe goes through this whole process, boop, 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 whatever, contentious or not, boop, boop, and instead of getting turned into one of these, he goes directly from here, directly to here, skipping all of this right here, and he turns into, say, a gremlin or a sprite or something like that. Something to note is first world natives, so all Fae who die on their plane, have their energy returned to the plane, and they reform usually within 10 days. They have immortality. Some return as new forms of Fae, so it's not guaranteed they come back the same, but most return no worse for wear, unlike many of the other planes where at least there's some kind of change that happens. Meaning, why is that important to know? Because they usually have a really good reason to be risking their otherwise immortal existence there, and are more than willing to make deals so that they can potentially get away to return there. They are Fae, however. They can be very whimsical or a little naive. Why does all that matter as well? Because a lot of evil Fae follow the eldest, the Lantern King, sort of an evil eldest if you would, and come to cause trouble across the planes. And they are so whimsical, some of these followers, and Fae so whimsical, that they are naive even to their own immortality. Fae who die off-world either get judged just like other mortals, or take the unique option at the Lake of Mortal Reflections to reincarnate as other Fae again. So Fae have a unique option once they come down here. When they reincarnate, they only reincarnate back into Fae. Sort of like they've been designated to the first world and they just sort of go back to it if they want. They have this unique option. Unlike anything else that when they reincarnate, they could turn into any other kind of creature. The Fae get to reincarnate just as Fae. It's like a special pass almost, sort of given to them for being a part of the first world, that last experiment. There's one left. Let's say a mortal dies, but they're a child. They haven't been able to gather a lot of XP in their life. They're young, they die, unfortunately. Pharasma's daughter, Atropos, Judge of Judges. Pharasma's daughter is the sole judge and guide of child souls. She takes them directly down to judgment, takes them personally through one of the portals to turn into some kind of shade or whatever the judgment may be. But if that was really all there was to this video wouldn't be so short, and this thing would not be so intimidating. So, let's go over the information blocks. Okay, so the first thing everyone always says in 2E, and everyone is always confused about, isn't just the 1E to 2E terms, it's also just alignment in general. Alignment was removed, sort of. So, in Remaster / since Rage of Elements, Paizo removed the alignments and replaced it with edicts and anathema mechanically. And they associate the phenomena, though, with the lore to a new concept called the Four Essences. Just because they removed alignment mechanically, they have not actually really removed alignment, despite not mentioning alignment in the lore anymore. They've sort of turned it into a different phenomena called the Four Essences. Some examples of products that still use alignment and will always still continue using alignment as it always was is stuff like the Harrow deck that I have a fantastic video on that you should go watch. There's many other older products as well that are like that. It's also useful for us to still know alignment and still at least know it in our minds as a tool and in reference to the history of all of this, because it helps us figure out very simply using the chart where a mortal might go for an NPC or something, having to read too much into it. It can be very helpful to associate alignment and use this chart rather than needing a deep understanding of all this to make up something plausible. I want this to be usable first before we go into all this information and the nitty-gritty of this all. So 2E Remaster, ROE, planar changes. What did they change? They made the material plane from 1E into the universe. They made the positive vitality plane into Creation's Forge, calling it Creation's Forge to relate it to the chart and lore of this is where new souls are created. This is why life exists. So it comes all back and new souls are forged here. This is where creation begins. The negative plane was turned into the Void. They added 2 new elemental planes, metal and wood. The Abyss, called the Outer Rifts. The Shadow Plane was renamed to the Netherworld. So the four essences. Since 2E and the cool rulebook where they first explained this and Secret Magic really explained it and that it's a science and it's being viewed as sort of like the building blocks of the universe now as time has gone forward and stuff. I highly suggest you read that to understand that. But basically since 2E, CRB, and expanded in Secrets of Magic and Rage of Elements with planar changes, it takes the old So another thing is in 1E, there was only sort of two essences. There was Quintessence and there was Potentiality. Basically, Quintessence is aligned essence, and Potentiality was unaligned essence. That has been gotten rid of, and both of those terms have been sort of, one, Potentiality was sort of just gotten rid of entirely. We don't use Potentiality, and there's no such thing as unaligned essence anymore, at least in that term. Quintessence, like I said earlier, is the physical side of spiritual essence that makes up souls. We'll get there. But the main things to take from the four essence, first off, is Potentiality is gone. Quintessence is sort of rolled into spiritual essence. Quintessence is still around. It's still called Quintessence. And you can actually view the four essences as five essences, because Quintessence is sort of the fifth essence, if you would. And the body, the physical body that outsiders, shades, and petitioners are made of, that's Quintessence, the physical part, the thing you can touch. Spiritual essence is the thing you can't touch, the thing that makes up a soul. And again, the four essences are the theoretical and academic definitions of the magical and philosophical science of metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of explaining the fundamental nature of being and the world that encompasses it. Many other studies build off it as concepts of the building blocks of magic and the universe. That is what the four essences is. It's basically five essences with Quintessence, and now let's actually talk about those essences. You have material essence, also called matter, body, or physical essence. It's the definition of physical and tangible components and reactions that compose reality, the universe/material plane. It's shaped and manipulated by mental and vital essences. Material essence includes not only tangible matter itself, but also its scientifically observable reactions, particularly physics and chemistry, such as the concept of cold, hot, and the properties of acid and electricity. It encompasses the concepts of the four elements also, the elemental planes containing the purest manifestation of matter's pure form. Material essence is the opposite of spiritual essence. There's also a fifth element called Aether that we'll get to. Spirit, or ethereal essence, is the definition of the immaterial and intangible, the opposite of material. Components of soul's alignment and transformative emotion in reality. It's the opposite of tangible material essence. For instance, incorporeal undead, whom souls reside in the void or in between the astral, ethereal, or material, the form we actually perceive is made of non-physical spiritual essence, just like how a soul that we can't see is made of it. The same can be true of certain forms of incorporeal undead. And the reason they're incorporeal is because the form that we're seeing is just a manifestation of their spiritual essence, for instance. It works both ways. Or they can be ectoplasmic, which is related to Aether, which is the fifth element. So just like how they did with the four essences, there's a fifth element also that they added into 2E. Beings native to planes other than the universe are composed entirely of spiritual essence and or quintessence. Every other being native to any other plane and other beings, including forms of Leshy that are actually made out of vitae, that is pure vital essence, are actually sometimes composed of other things than just material, and most outsiders are exclusively non-material. The properties of spiritual essence can be manipulated by Aether. Aether is known as pure force, the fifth element. It's related to ectoplasm, which is the combination of planar essence of the ethereal plane and elemental energy, a mixture of vital and material essences. It's associated with ectoplasm. I've said that like 4 times. Aether is the force that powers telekinesis, psychic abilities, and is separate from the physical forces of matter. Controversially, much like how quintessence is the physical form of spiritual essence, the fifth essence, It's proposed that Aether is the fifth element to the four: air, fire, water, earth, Aether. So they added a fifth essence and a fifth element while also incorporating the four essences in the CRB. And that's what came out in Secrets of Magic. Continuing through, mental essence, also called mind, thought, and astral essence, is the definition of fundamental energies that allow beings to think about, rationalize, and remember reality. And also the thing that lets us think about the material, think about physicality, interact with reality. It's so much more than even just that line. It's all of those things, the emotion and what that means, even in me saying that. It's the opposite of the instinctual vital essence and brings shape to material and spiritual essences. Why does it keep saying it shapes or is related? Because all of these things work in tandem, either controlling the others or changing them or bringing shape to them. Our minds and imagination bring shape to the material reality and the spiritual processes of the universe. Those entire topics and ideas, both as a fantasy science, a philosophy that you can look at both outside and inside the game and otherwise. Mental essence empowers and facilitates rational thought, logic, language, learning, and consciousness in beings, including some partially unconscious emotions. Typo. This includes unconscious dreams, which can join mental and spiritual essences, and perception and disbelief of illusions. Its application is also not limited to sapience. Non-sapient beings also interact with mental essence. Vital essence, also called life, heart, faith, and instinct, is the definition of the fundamental energies that animate reality and fuel its being's instinctual behaviors. The opposite of the deliberate mental essence and brings shape to material and spiritual essences. Vital essence represents sort of two things, maybe even three things. It's the dualities of life and death, vitality and void, creation and destruction. It's the essence that gives life to beings, grants them their basest emotions and instincts, not the things that require more thought or mental essence, but their base programming, and empowers impulse irrational emotions, non-logical thought, and religious faith. It's sort of three things. It's that duality of life and death, faith, dogma, but it also encompasses nature itself, instinct, and that leads to other essences. So in 2e, planar essence is any combination of the 4 or 5 essences. It's the essential substance, energy of a plane, the source of planar quintessence. Essentially any combination of these coming from a plane, it's called planar essence. Divine essence is what deities are composed of. Divine essence. Death can result in that essence being lost, uncontrollably distributed, or contained. That's what God's Reign, the books, and sort of Gorum dying all explain to us. It sort of looks through that process of what happens to divine essence and what effects that can happen on a world, all of that sort of thing. Exemplars, the class, sparks of divinity, for instance, are made of divine essence, for example, or highly related most of the time. So, dummy wrap up. So, 1E potentiality is right out the window. We don't use that anymore. Potentiality does not exist. Quintessence still exists. It's the physical side of spiritual essence. Then we have material essence, stuff that's physical, reality, mental essence, that is mind, thought, and sort of logic, learning, consciousness, okay? Vital essence, which is sort of a split of three things, sort of the duality of life, love, faith, and instinct. I sort of cut it into 3. You can cut it into the 4, though, sort of the 4 official there as well. Then we have spiritual essence, which is the stuff that makes up souls. Quintessence, which is the physical part of that. And then we have planar essence, which is any mixture coming from a plane. And divine essence that makes up deities and exemplar sparks of divinity. Sort of funny to get to this now, but, you know, it is a massive thing. And this took me forever. Down here is an explanation sort of along with these two things that started this all. The River of Souls is known by most. It's the journey of the river from death to your soul being judged at the Boneyard, blah, blah, blah. It travels through the elemental planes toward the astral plane. The Antipode, the drain thing in the upper right of the chart, is a vortex in the center of the Maelstrom that drains excess essence, and blah, blah, blah. It's just an explanation of that. But what I really want to point out is, so my first video, River of Souls for Dummies, it just went over these two images. These two panels is what created all of this and made me think about all of this other stuff. Because these two things here are the only two official things that you're supposed to visualize to figure out all of this. I couldn't do it personally, which is why I had to make all of this. And this is the 1E Jared Blando River of Souls chart, and it was very confusing if you ask me. It requires you to know in a separate document what each of these blips mean to really decode the whole thing. So we start here in the middle of the universe. You can sort of imagine all the planets sort of in the middle, and our universe is here. The black is the dark tapestry, which is space, basically. And overall, the planes, the elemental planes, are represented by these rings. And I've sort of done this all up here. You start here, you die. This is the Boneyard / gateway to the outer spheres, is what it used to sort of be called and sort of viewed as. You're judged, which sends you sort of over here down this path. This is the shade path. And again, it's sort of confusing. I'm not going to go over every blip, but basically this is sort of transforming into a shade, becoming planar energy. And then it goes around to then shades turning into outsiders, to being destroyed, to turning into new souls, again, going back through, and then over here turning into Fae, basically, and then back to the universe. And the interesting part about this chart is when you actually understand that, if you go boop, boop, around, okay, and you realize it comes back, it's literally Pharasma's symbol like this, sort of upside down, the entire process as it comes back. Anyways, in 2E, they made the 2E chart, and what this is it shows the interconnectedness of planes. So this is this sphere sort of right here with everything else also attached. And it depicts all of the planes. So Creation's Forge right here. We have the first world, which is the green, the conduit, which is the white lines of the new souls coming to pass the ethereal into our world, which is this yellow thing right here. So the blue here is the ethereal. This is the universe, the inner sphere, the yellow thing, which is also the sun of the outer sphere. That has all of the planes also on it, the other 8 main court planes anyways. And the elemental planes, those rings in the universe, are depicted as a sun that you can also see atop axis. And again, you needed to know all the context of this to understand where this worked in relation to this. And what value does this give you? It tells you that these are overlapping planes and how close they are. And you can see the conduit of souls also goes to the void, because the void is sort of the equal part of creation in a lot of ways of this duality. Very interesting stuff. But these two panels, the main thing is, this is what made all of the rest of this. Next, this is a little map of the Boneyard. So that's Grotus up there. Great Apocalypse Moon, basically, is the god of the end times. And when this universe ends, he will most likely be descending down upon the Boneyard. And yeah, isn't that great? Yay. Grotus is the best. In fact, you know what? I think Grotus was right. I'm just kidding. Anyways, the inner area. Let's explain this inner area first. So these black lines that you see, like sort of all going in this, sort of depicting the dead roads, which is a special sort of invisible layer, sort of like how the Lake of Mortal Reflections is a sort of other layer to the plane that Psychopomps used to go across the universe as well as across all of the Spirelands here. And then going from the center out, we have the palace, which is this big structure here going up another little section here. It's like an actual big old thing in the middle, all right? And this is called the sigil that is on top, sort of the very tip of the city of Axis below. But this is the palace, sort of the midpoint that juts up through the sigil is Pharasma's palace. Not the court, but her own palace where she herself sits up in. She deals only with contracts. That's what this is here. The only things resolved by the goddess herself in the palace is souls under different contracts, either her own contracts or those who disagree with contracts for their souls. This very inner circle, small little stretch of space is the graveyard of souls that separates all of this from the inner bits. The court is just inside of that. So it's sort of graveyard, court, palace. Outer area all the way out, okay, is the Boneyard / Spirelands. It's endlessly vast. Something to note about all of the planes and why they're so interesting to know and how you can use this to tell stories is determined living mortals might also traverse the long and difficult path to make it here to secure a meeting with Pharasma, where they can petition the goddess for answers or favors. There's actually a couple different stories I can point to where mortals have literally done that, much like Dante's Inferno. For instance, some examples is The Redemption Engine. This is a book written by James L. Sutter. It is narrated by Ray Porter, a part of the Pathfinder Tales line of novels. There's a whole 20 years of different novels and books, a lot of them done like 2010s, 2014s, but they're really good. This one in particular talks about an atheist who doesn't really like Pharasma, the process, and all of that. We're going to talk about atheists in a couple minutes here. But he's not a fan of this process, but he is one of Pharasma's agents having to accept some of that power, and he has to deal with sort of the bickering fiends and angels always wanting more souls. This image is him actually fighting an angel who disagrees with him as he's there going to visit heaven. There's so much infinite story and adventure usability out of this to do something outside the norm. And to be thorough and getting through this block. Duskwalkers. What's a Duskwalker? It's a versatile heritage in 2e. You've probably seen it. And basically, a Duskwalker isn't born. They are instead created. Each manifests as a mortal child in a location with close ties to death. They embody the somber powers of the Psychopomps. Only a finite number of them exist at any one point in time. No Dustwalkers capable of bearing or siring children. Now on to the next two biggest questions that people always have. One, how does atheism fit in? Why are there entire nations that believe in atheism? For instance, the symbol of Rahadum, one of the major ones. So, atheists are interesting in that they very much believe in the afterlife, the river of souls, the gods, because clearly magic is right in front of us and clearly these things exist. They know that they likely are going to be judged, however. Many feel that's unjust, much like people who decide to be undead, but being undead is a pretty big extreme. Not everyone necessarily wants that. Or, for instance, some people just feel that gods are playing with mortal lives. Maybe it's not quite worth to go that extent and hold back from this, but they don't deserve my fealty. Gods declare Pharasma the sole judge of mortal life. Are they too lazy or worse? Gods so dependent on Pharasma that they can't function without fealty to her? Those are some of the themes and thoughts of some atheists on Golarion, and why, again, there's entire nations like Rahadum whose governments hold such ideals. They have their own thing called the laws of mortality, and it's basically about accepting the gods but not giving them the fealty. Pharasma takes a select few atheists and makes them psychopomps directly, as they make logical powerhouses once enlightened. And atheists who are really against the process, again, are sent to the graveyard to either dissolve with time or accept their fate and basically become psychopomps / also be selected to become psychopomps. Pharasma takes some of them directly as psychopomps, some of them become dead petitioners, others, again, have the option to reincarnate. A lot of these individuals who maybe are against it but don't necessarily outright think that they shouldn't be, they don't outright refute it, still might have the potential to reincarnate, depending. Tian-Xia, how does that work? And this is a bit of a longer one. I'm not going to read the whole of it. They have their own set of gods that are a part of this realm called the Celestial Court. And it's ruled by this god, Shizuru. Most people in Tian-Xia are not monotheistic or like say like traditionally like Buddhist or something like this, or like a Far Eastern thing like some Westerners might think initially. They have just a very many amounts of philosophies and religions as the main whole of Aveston does. And it leads to all kinds of different philosophical schools. They basically have broken down all of their different philosophies to 4 schools. There's the School of Order, the Path of Mysteries, the Way of Spirits, and the Teachings of the River. A lot of people just see the Teaching of the River, or the Sangpotshi, and get very confused how this relates to all of this. But the gist is that most people in Tian-Xia are still judged the same way. They still go down the same river. They still have the same options and etc. However, their cultures and their philosophies have way more accepted this reincarnation. In fact, a good amount of them believe that by going through reincarnation multiple times, that by the time that they end up here, they will have a better outcome in this hearing and go on to a greater, better thing. So nothing changes. All of this, none of this changes anything other than they might have a higher chance to reincarnate. Where does Pharasma come from? What is all this about? Pharasma's origin myths come from 2 separate books, and I suggest you look them up in the Wikipedia. They're not actually books, they're in-world books. The Concordance of Rivals and Windsong Testaments. And while they diverge on some details, they agree that Pharasma was the reality's first deity, having emerged into our current reality as the sole survivor of a previous universe. The highest order of Psychopomp, the only thing that's really above a Yamaraj, or the judges, the black dragon, crow sort of hybrids, is a Psychopomp Usher. Ushers are really similar to Empyreal Lords in that they have immense autonomy. Maybe even sparks of their own divinity even, it's been suggested in some parts. Powerful ancient Psychopomps may ultimately ascend to becoming an Usher. And Ushers are unique beings who may even work independently of Pharasma entirely. Although, again, they all respect the Lady of Graves. They judge entire worlds or universes. There are currently 16 known Ushers. The most relevant to the Boneyard is Barzak. He's responsible for maintaining the Dead Roads, which is the route network I talked about before. It's used by Psychopomps to travel the universe, as well as vast distances of the Spirelands, and for escorting the souls of those who die safely and quickly. Going back to Pharasma, where did this all come from? Why are we recycling souls? Why are we making new souls? Why? Where does that come from? And it comes down to the Aeon, the Axiomites, and you can view Axiomites, Aeons, and Inevitables as the Monad's kind of outsider, if you would. Sort of its own sort of form, not really its own form, they are just outsiders, but it's sort of its own category related directly to the Monad. So Axiomites are Aeon/monitors, which are kinds of outsider from the city of Axis. The thing that the Boneyard sits on top of a disc, that disc being called the Sigil. Axiomites claim that they are mathematical laws of reality made manifest, like math of the universe made to form, so that the universe can try to understand itself. The first Axiomites were created from arithmetic dust by the threefold pillars of the Axiomite God Mind. The God Mind is like this actual thing in the city of Axis. Basically is constantly calculating all kinds of different probabilities. Anyways, Aeons are an inscrutable family of monitor, a kind of outsider, who serve to preserve order and balance throughout the great beyond. They constantly maintain a balance between pairs of forces beyond the knowledge of mortals. Aeons are created on the astral plane. When 2 opposite thoughts broadcast from other planes that coalesce and slam into each other on the astral plane, they form from the slamming, sort of like neutrons and stuff slapping, they form an aeonic nebula, which flash with momentary bursts of emotional auras and crackle in metaphysical debates. As the nebula grows into a critical mass, sort of like a black hole, a new Aeon is created. They will then immediately manifest wherever the Monad needs them to fulfill their task. All Aeons, all of these sort of things, these 3 things, are bound to or in a state called the Monad. They are the Monad and are also in a state of the Monad. It's hard to tell where that starts and that ends. And the Monad is an omnipresent philosophy demigod that has existed since the multiverse's beginnings and represents the supreme oneness between all aeons and the multiverse itself. The Monad is the thing behind the survivors, the Pharasma, and the continuation of existence through creating souls. Pharasma, in a lot of means, is a step down even from the Monad, and the Monad is sort of above everything while also being a part of all of Aeons. Anything that is an Aeon is sort of a part of the Monad. And something that's new in 2E is the Axiomites, the people of Axis, were not Aeons before. They are, in fact, Aeons now. It's been determined that they are, in fact. Anyways, Aeons exist as an extension of the multiverse and understand themselves as part of the Monad's whole instead of viewing it as a divine patron. Again, sort of being a part of it. When destroyed, and this is why you need to view them as their own kind of outsider, when an Aeon is destroyed, or upon accomplishing specific goals, Aeons fade back to the planar fabric and their energies are recycled by the Monad. They are not a part of the cycle. They are completely separate. Axiomites create inevitables via Unmade, the petitioner. It's a kind of petitioner when you go to Axis, you're actually turned into an inevitable. The Unmade are individuals who have their skin covered in riddles, and when they finally decipher those riddles, it allows them to enter the adamantine crucible and be turned into an inevitable. An inevitable, basically a war machine to fight the Proteans and all things of chaos. It's very Warhammer, if you ask me. Very Warhammer. But anyways, that's the Axiomites, Aeons, Inevitables, and the Monad. Basrakal, or the City of Change, is one of the coolest things if you ask me, and it's the only thing that isn't either a shade or an outsider that we're going to be talking about from here on out. Basrakal is a settlement that defies all logic. It's located on semi-stable islands of reality within the ever-changing Maelstrom, because it can only be so stable in the Maelstrom, and yes, it is semi-collapsing, but it is more stable than other places in the Maelstrom. And it's a city home to outsiders and mortals who defy their inborn alignments in nature. Outsiders who defy or go against like that inherent being of their plane, for instance. Proteans see exquisite beauty in the transformation of any outsider's base alignment. And it's thought to be a major reason why the city is tolerated in the Maelstrom. It adds nuance to the Proteans and chaos. It's a place of semi-stability and a place of infinite instability. It's very cool, and it gives an out for anything to sort of defy the status quo, even if it is very rare for individuals to make it to the city, right? It's very rare. And there is some talk of Dis actually helping people get to Basrakal or other means out of the Hells, but that's also a very seldom thing. This is not something that normally would happen. It's something very, very outside the norm. But we play the game to tell exceptional stories, so it seemed important to put here. It's really cool and exceptional stories and adventure that can be had in the Outer Sphere through the Maelstrom. It's really cool. Phantoms are interesting. This was actually a topic that really confused me even up until a couple of weeks ago when I was learning through this. And essentially, they were a part of a class in first edition called the Spiritualist, and they were sort of semi-related to the Void. What's changed into 2E is that they are just summoner options now. They're not a part of the Spiritualist class. There is no Spiritualist class. Instead, they've been sort of rolled into summoner options, and they're no longer related to the Void at all. Phantoms. When a soul in queue for judgment prematurely departs from the River of Souls and is shunted into the ethereal plane, sort of that knocked soul sort of idea, whether as a result of nefarious interlopers like daemons or hags, malignant planar magic, or even fate, these souls become dislodged from the natural order of life and death and linger in a sort of purgatory. Unlike petitioners, shades, these ethereal phantoms retain memories of their life before death. They do remember things. And unlike spirits such as ghosts, phantoms aren't tinged with the foul influences of undeath or void. That confuses a lot of people are genies and elementals, and they are still outsiders, just like how phantoms are just a linked outsider, linked to something. A genie and elemental is just a form of inner sphere outsider, but that doesn't make them special. They're just another outsider. And elemental lords have representation in the yard just like other forms of lesser and greater divinity. A topic I highly suggest you look at beyond this chart for your own research is the Empyreal Lords. And basically all they really are, okay, despite the huge dozens of them that exist in the world, all they are is outsiders who've transcended their original forms and have acquired some kind of spark of divinity. Saren Ray at one point, for instance, God of the Sun, was one before. Because of that divine essence, because of that spark of divinity that they have, these outsiders are subject to their own autonomy. They're not quite as controlled by where they come from or the thing that makes them up. Qlippoths, and these are basically abyss or outer rift outsiders. They're mentioned all the way up here in the chart. It's one of the first things we sort of mention here is Qlippoths and others that destroy and consume twist your soul. So what is that all about? What is that all about? So Qlippoths, before hell's existence, before demons ever existed, the abyss was full of Qlippoths, these things. They're like parasitic sort of beings. The abyss started bleeding into the Maelstrom, the plane of chaos, leading to a Qlippoth Protean war. Yes, these two things fought. And because of these two things fighting before hell existed, before law and etc., it distracted like these forces of chaos long enough for law and like the outer sphere to form. Qlippoths are parasites that make the soul of the victims unjudgeable by Pharasma. Their main plan is to starve the River of Souls, all of demonkind, fiendkind, and all the other outsiders, the cycle, and their enemies through that unique ability to make souls unjudgeable. Proteans. Proteans are outsiders of the Maelstrom, and they are physical embodiments of chaos and change, and marred by good or evil. Extensions of the Maelstrom, the plane of chaos. Proteans serve as the limbs, senses, and immune system against infectious law. They want the dissolution of reality and often assault other planes. Knocked from the river, we spoke about earlier. Essentially, it's when death is significant, mental essence can build, a soul can be knocked, which is being too charged, and spiritual essence goes awry. It's shaped by that mental essence, and it takes its own path or gets stuck along the way. Many evil outsiders' goals involve to consume or knock a soul, and is why many, like Asura's divine accidents, get such joy from it. And that brings us to Eidolons, and much like how Phantoms here, you see it says linked outsider, Eidolons are basically just linked outsiders of any kind of form. An Eidolon is any kind of outsider that is linked to a summoner. Its close tie grants it form, shaped by its summoner, usually on that first summoning. Eidolons appear as fantastical creatures and bear a glowing rune that also appears on its summoner while summoned. When the link between an Eidolon and its summoner is destroyed, or in edge cases, the Eidolon is free to act and roam the universe with free will. There's a couple different books, actually, that talk from the perspective of an Eidolon who used to have a summoner that now no longer does, and then goes along the world in their own adventures. And why does this matter? Because you could be a PC version of this. It's the same thing with the Phantoms. You could have another PC who dies come back as an Eidolon for someone, or use that in an infinite amount of story ways. But the gist is, an Eidolon is just a linked outsider. A Phantom is a linked outsider in the form of a spirit that was Ari from the river taking form as an outsider. Sahkil. Sahkil are basically rebel psychopomps. They're former psychopomps who rebel against their role as the soul shepherds for the River of Souls. Their knowledge of multiversal entropy drives them away from their service to Pharasma to reform themselves into dominating horrors of the ethereal plane. Sahkil feed on and embody fear, mortal fear, and each one basically embodies a certain kind of mortal fear. One of the cuter and cooler ancestors that we have in 2E is the Leshy. And Leshies are mortals, and they're a very particular kind of mortal. Leshies are plant or fungus that is inhabited by a vitae, whom are made of pure vital essence, not spiritual essence or any other kind of essence like other forms of spirit are. And it's not even really a spirit, it's just pure vital essence. A full Leshy, like the PC version, is one bonded with spiritual essence, or a soul. So it's that mixed with a soul. And that bond of soul and vitae can be broken or weakened. The weak form are called Leshy spirits, or lessers. Neither these nor Vitae, however, are actually spirits, like related to the ethereal plane or anything of that nature, or Aether, or any of those things, ectoplasmic, nothing like that. They are their own thing. I was going to explain what the difference between a greater servitor and a herald was, and a couple other like things in this little block that was here that you probably noticed for most of the video, but I've gotten rid of that. I've constantly updated this for weeks and weeks and made all kinds of different decisions, and there's some things that just have to be compressed or just have to be done in a different video or a different thing. I've gotten to the point I can't just toss even more into this and make it 2 or 3 hours. My mind cannot do it anymore. The last block that I will show you here is the Who's That Shade / Petitioner. And this is basically those shades, those early infant stages before becoming true outsiders. Shades are still outsiders, but they're not really true outsiders, like full or as prominent or as much quintessence or spiritual essence. The infant style stages of that, or at least the general infantile stages of that. And for instance, Punmas or Funmas, or however you want to say that, or the elemental version of a shade for the elemental planes. It talks about the Asphodus. It talks about the Unbound, which is a very, very rare version of shade / petitioner. And that's what this block is. And that is the entirety of this. And like I said before, I have gone through this for weeks. Absolutely weeks. I've spent nearly the last month going through this. I've been on Reddit with thousands of uplikes and dozens of different threads talking about all of these different topics to make sure that I at least got it as accurate as I possibly can as just some dude on the internet. Thank you for watching this, getting through this. This is 18 years of lore learned by some dude over the last 2 years, condensed into this sort of useful, sort of not useful tool, and I just hope that it helps people figure out the stories that are told in these products, and better yet, how to create all new stories in the Lost Omen settings from those products, or from the stories that you have in those products. Death, the River of Souls, the many forms of outsider, the judgment, why the gods exist, why the universe exists, where and how do we start to create a character? So much of it on a greater level begins from this crucial lore, and it's what makes everything feel like the unique fantasy of being on Galarian in the Lost Omen setting, rather than just something like a generic fantasy setting that I just call Lost Omens. And as much as I want my stories to be my stories, I also want them to make some basic semblance of sense to the greater cosmology of the setting that I love to play. I really enjoy the story, the depth, the world building. No matter how in-depthful it seems to be, no matter how crazy I seem to be, this is just a little tool to create stories with. And to sort of demystify a lot of the Lost Omen specific questions that a lot of people have.